Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
Hello and welcome back to a very special episode of the Command Zone podcast. This is going to be a shorty.
Yeah, it's like a bonus mini-sode.
A mini-sode. And today we are talking about a brand new card from Wilds of Eldraine. It's one of the only legends to be spoiled at time of recording, and it is a doozy. It's Talion, the Kindly Lord.
Yeah, this card has led to a lot of speculation in the office to the point where we were arguing about certain things, and we had to... I found myself compelled at the early hours of the morning to go in and try and compile some data to see who was right, because we've had these discussions, and then we were like, we should make a video about this.
Yeah,
it's super interesting.
It's really neat. If you haven't seen Talion yet, Talion, the Kindly Lord, is a faerie noble, a legendary for 2, a blue, and a black. He has flying, is a 3/4, but importantly, Talion says, as Talion enters the battlefield, choose a number between 1 and 10. Whenever an opponent casts a spell with mana value, power, or toughness equal to the chosen number, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. Insult to injury on that last bit.
Yeah, it automatically reads as quite powerful.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think that part is given, and I don't think the power level discussion is kind of the interesting part of this.
Yeah, the question that we all had is, what's the number? Is there a best number? Is there a number, are there numbers that are better at certain times? If you're if you're building Talion, the commander, you have to know the answer to this question is what number to pick.
Or even just putting it in your deck. You're going to want, when you casted it, for any reason, if it's out and you've played it, you want to know, what number am I supposed to? What's the optimal number that's going to do the most damage, draw me the most cards, be the most annoying to my opponents? And yeah, within the office, as soon as we saw the card, there was a lot of speculation. There's 2 things I want to point out.
Yeah.
One is, again, to reiterate, the numbers that it's counting are the total mana value of the card. It is on opponent's casting.
Yep. So the spell on the stack.
So it's not your cards. It's just your opponent's. It's a spell on the stack. It is mana value, power, and toughness. So creatures matter more to this because they have all 3 numbers. Whereas if you cast a counter spell or any instance in sorcery, any artifact that doesn't have power and toughness, there's only the mana value on that spell that possibly could trigger this. Whereas a creature has 3 possible spots where it could trigger. So, and then 0, you can't choose. It has to be a number between 1 and 10, and you also can't choose above 10. So not that you would, but like Emrakul and stuff like that, the power and toughness wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those are just interesting things to think about as we delved into it. When we initially were talking about the card and saw the card, what was your thoughts as far as... I know it's hard to compartmentalize because we know our data now.
Yeah.
As far as what number would probably be best to choose.
It was tricky because it's the first thing you keep in mind is you're okay, when I look at my curves, the highest part of my deck are the 3 and 4 all the time. But you're but that doesn't take into account the power and toughness.
Right. How does
and
that
I play
change
a lot of creatures. So for me, I was okay, that shifts it probably down for me. So it's closer to 3. But I genuinely was I don't know, 4 is a possibility there. And the lower it got, I didn't think 1 was on the table. And was 2 is probably in the mix. So I was it's 2, 3, and 4. And it probably depends on what deck you're playing against.
Yeah. And I think that reason makes sense. I felt 2... would be right because of mana rocks mostly.
Right.
That was the big thing where I was most decks have mana rocks, and even the ones that don't have rampant growth, Farseek, those kind of things that stand in, and those don't have power and toughness. Mm-hmm. So I thought if you say most creatures are kind of going to even out, which I don't even know was correct as we'll talk about, but that's in my mind. We had some people here who even thought 1 might be in play.
Yeah.
Because, Soul Ring's in every deck.
Yeah.
And then you got things like Sensei's Divine Top, and then mana dorks like Landwar Elves and Birds of Paradise are ubiquitous, and even Sakura Trivelder, which is a 2-drop but has a 1 on it.
Has a 1 on it.
Yeah.
Dockside Extortionist is 2 toughness but 1 power.
Right, and those are cards that see a lot of play. Mm-hmm. So I didn't think it would be 4. And I thought it was almost impossible for it to be 5 or higher.
Yeah, I think we threw out all the numbers above 4, for sure. And we'll talk about it in our data where it's basically we only considered 1 through 4, and it's the only numbers that are relevant generally.
I mean, we did compile the data for 5, 6, 7, 8 and above. We kind of put together, but we were so it's but we couldn't come to a consensus. There was people in all sort of three camps. There was a 3, 2, and a 1.
The other thing that swung me toward 4 was there's a lot of commanders that are 4 CMC or that are 3 4s or 4 3s. So I did see, like, 4 showed up a lot in the commander spot specifically.
Yeah, and of course, we're opening EDH Rec. We're like just sort of scrolling through and just kind of ballparking it, you know?
It's a really hard thing to gather really data on, because we were like, okay, so what if we just look at all of the mana values of the top 200 cards on EDH Rec or something like that? And you're like, well, you're going to see Sol Ring more, so that has to be weighted more.
Yeah.
And you're going to see like if this card is in the top 200, that doesn't mean it's necessarily in the decks you're playing with. It's all very finicky.
So, yeah. The first thing we should realize is that somebody else already crunched some numbers on this.
Yes.
Which we found later once we started looking into it. You actually reach out to them, right?
Yeah. So I've follow Magic Data Science on Twitter. It's MTG_DS. They release a ton of stats, especially at the end of the year. But as cards come out like this, they tend to just dig through, use their data science background and apply it to Magic. So I think they're a very interesting follow. And I immediately messaged them and was like, hey, what can we ask you to compile some data on Talion? And they were like, I already did. It's on my Twitter. I'm like, I should have checked first. You are right. But they put together a really cool chart that we'll put on the screen here of all of the numbers. And it says that it is measuring the proportion of cards in the 99 of decks on EDH Rec with power, toughness, or mana value equal to the numbers 1 through 10. So what the proportion part means is that they weighted it toward playability. So
the popularity score.
Yeah. So like Sol Ring got counted way more than other cards.
Right.
Because it was measuring all of the cards that were in decks. So if Sol Ring was in 1,000 decks, it got counted 1,000 times.
You have a lot more chance that a deck you're playing against has Sol Ring in it than has Kelpie Guide in it.
Right. But, if there's 100 decks with Kelpie Guide on it, we counted a Kelpie Guide 100 times.
Versus 1,000,000 times for Sol Ring. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it is weighted by popularity, and their data is very interesting. So I guess we just run through these percentages and then we can talk about the most.
Yeah.
So cards with 1 in the power, toughness, or mana value. So we'll just say with cards that have 1 is a hit.
We should clarify that. So if a card like Llanowar Elves has a 1 mana value, a 1 power, and a 1 toughness, it gets counted as 1 hit for 1. Now, if a card like Dockside Extortionist has 2 mana value, 2 toughness, 1 power, it gets counted as a hit for 1 and a hit for 2. But not 2 hits for 2 and 1 hit for 1. Right. Because one card cannot trigger Talion twice. It can only trigger it 1 time. So you're basically coming up with a percentage chance that any given spell or card that your opponent has one of these numbers on it. Yeah. In the right spot.
This also counts the proportion of all cards in the 99. So these percentages do include lands, which would not trigger Talion, but are included in these percentages.
Right. These percentages indicate the percentage chance that any given card they're holding or draw will trigger
this number.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a hit for 1, there is an 18.1% chance that a card will trigger on 1. There is a 27.7% chance that a card will trigger on 2, a 23.7% of cards that trigger on 3, a 15.2% chance that a card triggers on 4, a 9.5 for 5, 5.2 for 6, 2.8 for 7, 1.1 for 8, 0.6 for 9, and 0.3 for 10.
All right. So to translate those for our audio-only listeners,
yes,
the top hit at 27.7% is 2.
Yes.
So 2 CMC, 2 toughness, or 2 power. But close behind, about a 4%, actually, according to our friend here, a 4% differential at 23.7% is 3. And then 1 is kind of a distant third at 18.1%. So this was the overall data in sort of a super generic way that was found by not us. This is not our data.
No, this data belongs to EDH Rec and the research belongs to Magic Data Science. Make sure you go follow them on Twitter. Super interesting. I mean, we were in the right ballpark where it's 1 through 4 are definitely our top. Yep. 4 is low at 15.2%, but is sort of leaps and bounds higher than the next one. So those are the 4 relevant data points.
When we saw this, I thought 1 was much lower than I expected.
Yes. I know that like when I build decks, my curve is quite low in the one slot. Like there's, usually like 10 cards at one. But I did think that the power and toughness part would buff that up a little bit more than it is. But it makes sense to me that 2 and 3 are the most. They are so close. 4% difference, I suppose.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty close.
Which is pretty close.
Yeah.
An interesting thing here is that this tells you that 2 is right with a blindfold on. Right. So like if you're playing against 3 random decks, 2 is going to be right most of the time. But like 23% of the time, it's not right. But some of the time, 3 could be correct.
Presumably, yeah.
Presumably 3 could be correct.
Yeah, it's close enough that there are definitely have to be some decks that have more 3 hits than 2 hits. And the question is, can we create a rubric to figure out when that might be the case so that I know when 3 is the correct pick? We gathered some data to try to answer that question, and we're going to dig into it after a few words from our sponsors.
Where's Jimmy? He's usually so punctual.
Yeah.
Hey! Sorry about that. I was just getting my deck together, or most of it.
But that's just a really big stack of envelopes.
I prefer to think of it as pre-sleeved.
Well, where's your commander?
Let me check. Tracking says he's in shipping label created.
Jimmy, you really got to use Card Kingdom. They send all of your cards in one convenient package. No dealing with tons of envelopes or wrangling all those tracking numbers.
And Card Kingdom's shipping is super fast, so you can be sure you'll have that new deck ready before your next game night.
And if anything ever goes wrong with an order, their customer service always goes above and beyond to fix it.
All right, that settles it. I'm using Card Kingdom from now on. But for now, is everyone ready to play?
I guess. Do you even have a keepable hand?
Hang on, I gotta shuffle.
Get your cards in one safe, easy package with Card Kingdom. When you go to cardkingdom.com/command, you can support the show while shopping from Card Kingdom's huge selection of singles, sealed product, and more. Again, that's cardkingdom.com/command.
Run! Run! That thing will devour us all! Nothing can sate the hunger of Yargle, the glutton of Urborg!
Really? Have you tried Factor, America's #1 meal kit?
What? No! There's no time for that now!
I find that hard to believe. It only takes 2 minutes to prepare a fresh, never frozen Factor meal. You even get to skip the grocery store, prep time, and cleanup. Plus, they deliver meals straight to your door.
Are you insane? We've got to keep running!
Keeping healthy, eh? Factor's got you covered with their selection of dietitian-approved calorie-smart meals. Or try their Protein Plus selections if you need that extra boost to support your wellness goals. See, they got something for everyone.
Yargle! He's here! I hunger!
Here you go, Yargs. Try this cheesy bacon ranch shredded chicken. It's got portobellos and garlic broccoli. My favorite.
Yum! Okay, I go now.
Head to factormeals.com/command50 and use code command50 to get 50% off your first box. That's code command50 at factormeals.com/command50 to get 50% off your first box.
And then I'm going to flash out Illusory Ambusher. I will bolt it to draw 3 cards. I will sneak attack out Triskaidekaphile. I'm going to go to my upkeep and I will win the game.
That was your first time playing the deck?
Yeah. Well, first time in paper. I've already goldfished it like 100 times on ARCHIDEKT. Their playtester is super user-friendly. Playing cards just takes 1 click, and you can mulligan, tutor, and move through your turns with the press of a key. There are simple menus with counters and copies, and you can take notes on cards as you play them.
ARCHIDEKT is the best place to browse, brew, and playtest commander decks. Just go to archidekt.com/commandzone to get started.
That's ARCHIDEKT.com/commandzone. First of all, I started doing the data before we even knew this data already existed on Twitter. And I should have been smarter like Rachel and just seen if it existed.
Yeah.
But I was trying to do a sort of a breakdown that would answer some questions like which type of decks maybe would not have 2 as the number you want to choose when you're playing against them. Mm-hmm. And so our methodology, or my methodology, was I took the top commanders on EDHREC and I looked at the average deck for each of them and then literally just counted up the number of hits for each number,
deck.
Right? Yeah. For each number. And then I knew how many spells were in that deck and could get a percentage chance that any given spell that your opponent was holding would trigger on that number. So you get like playing against the Atraxa deck, and I'll just use that since it's the top commander in the last 2 years, you get a breakdown that says if you're playing against an Atraxa deck, obviously this is the average deck on EDH Rec, there's a 13.6% chance they have a card in their hand, or any given card they're holding will trigger on one.
Any spell.
Yeah, sorry, any spell. I didn't count lands.
Yeah.
Because lands can't trigger it. There's a 33.33% that it'll trigger 2. There's a 39.39% that it'll trigger 3. There's a 21.21% that it'll trigger 4. A 16.67% that it'll trigger 5. It goes down from there. And here we already see that this is a deck where, to be optimal, you would want to choose 3, not 2.
So we were like, interesting. Okay. So there are situations that 3 is the better choice. Atraxa is tough because Atraxa can be built in so many ways. So it's hard to glean, and it's 4 colors, and
when you click the average deck button on EDH Rec, what even theme of, is it Super Friends? Is it
Proliferate?
Yeah, is it +1/+1 counters?
Toxic.
Is it Infect? Yeah. So it's hard to even know, but that did show, it's possible that 3 is the number sometimes.
So we looked at the top 50 commanders on EDH Rec and just looked at those decks, and some were 3s and some were 2s, and even one deck was 1 is the correct answer, and that one was Najeela, which is a CEDH commander, and it checks out.
Yeah, I think we could hypothesize that CEDH will push the numbers down, and there might be more in CDH. It might be like between 1 and 2 that you should be choosing. We don't know because we didn't do it based on CDH. We did it based on an average deck, but we could hypothesize that. Yeah, so we did the top 50 commanders, and we got some data, and we tried to now we're trying to sort of dig in and figure out, what can we learn from it. As I was going through and doing the polls of the data myself, and then I didn't do all 50. We handed off. Eric did a lot of it, and I would want to give him credit, Eric Lem. One thing I noticed was, like, in the creature slot, when you're counting creatures, 3 is actually more likely to sort of be ahead after if you only counted creatures. Because if you think about it, the number 3 shows up in power and toughness more than the number 2 does. Because a 4-drop rarely has a 2 power, 2 toughness, but often will have a 3. A lot of 4/3s and 3/4s. 3/3s can still be at 4 mana. You get Solemn Simulacrum and things like that, but there's fewer cards that cost 4 mana that have either 2 power or 2 toughness. Once you get to 5 mana value, almost none of those have 2 power or 2 toughness, but they still will have 3. There'll be 3/5s, even 3/3s still exist up at those numbers if they have abilities, things like that. But you will like 3/3 flyers for 5 are kind of a ubiquitous thing that happens. So
Wizards also uses 3 as a balancing point, where it's like, okay, this dies to lightning bolt.
Yes.
A lot of powerful commanders have 3 toughness because they're easier to kill. They die to a braid and to lightning bolt, and to 3 is a very clear removal spot, especially for red decks in general.
Yeah, because they might go, in testing, this is slightly too powerful. Let's lower its toughness to 3 as a way to weaken it slightly, so that it dies to a little bit more removal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the thing I noticed was like, through creatures, 3 is a little bit stronger, but then you get into non-creatures and instants and sorceries, not to the extent you would think, but 2 does tend to be a little bit more common than 3. And then artifacts is where 2 really pulls ahead, because signets, every deck has Arcane Signet basically, Talisman, Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves. Yeah, a lot of very highly played cards are sitting at 2 mana. And so it tended to be like, as I was compiling data in that order, it'd be like, after creatures, 3 is ahead of 2. After instants and sorceries, 2 is close to 3, maybe even a little ahead. After after artifacts, 2 is now ahead of 3. And then enchantments and planeswalkers usually come at the end, and honestly, 3 usually wins those 2, but there's not as many of those in most decks.
Right.
So it tends to be like, 2 still sort of holds on and is ahead if you were looking at it as a race as you compiled it. And so the hypothesis from here was that maybe creature-based decks are the ones where you could think about choosing 3 when you're playing Talion rather than non-creature decks.
Yeah, and I mean, we based on the observation on creatures, we did break things down by color to see if like color delineated any, like cleared anything up a little bit. And so we took all of the 50, we split them into like, okay, of the blue commanders, what are the percentages?
Yeah.
Of the green commanders, change the percentages.
Sorry, yeah, I jumped ahead a little bit here.
Yeah.
The first thing we actually did was try and figure out, does color have any effect on it? Like, can you just say, oh, this deck has blue in it, therefore it's more likely to be this color, or this deck has green in it, therefore it's more likely to be this.
Yeah.
So we took out all the 5-color stuff and then looked, and we found, you want to read it?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty consistent across the board. White, blue, black, like all of the colors are, again, 2 is generally the best choice. The thing, like white is 38.03% for 2, blue is 39.15%, black is 38.74%, red is 37.31% 2, green is 37.21% 2. So green is the lowest in the 2 slot and is the highest in the 3 slot. It is 34.56% of cards in green decks are hits for 3. So it is like it's a 3% difference in green decks, which tend to be more creature based or tend to be a little bit rampier, so the spells are a little bit more expensive.
I mean, yeah, when I look at this list, this chart, the thing I look at is the difference between first place and second place. And the smallest gap is green, which is the creature color.
Right.
And the largest gap is blue, which is the least creature color.
Right. Spells and artifacts, yeah.
Yeah. So that tells me, I think, and again, the data interpretation, the interpretation part is what's up for trust us or don't, grain of salt. But that indicates to me that I think the hypothesis that creatures tend you towards the number 3 and non-creatures tend you away towards the number 2 as sort of the better choice. But again, 2 is the default. So then we broke down all the top 50 decks by archetype, saying like creature-based, enchantment-based, artifact-based, to try and see if you did that, would there ever be a situation where you want to choose the number 3 rather than the number 2? And what we kind of found was no, there's not.
Yeah. First, we compiled all of the decks that have over 30 creatures, and it was still the 2 was the best choice. And we were like, okay, what if it's over 35 creatures? So the density is even higher, and still 2 is the best choice, although it's close to 3. And then we broke down spells. Spells is sort of definitively it's close. 2 is still the best answer, and it's still the best for both artifacts and enchantments. Again,
and
closer.
Artifacts is very wide.
Yeah,
if it's an artifact-based deck, it's for sure 2.
Definitely 2.
Yeah.
It's like a 20%, 15% difference between the next 2. And 1 is even better than 2. Than 3, excuse me. 1 is better than 3 in artifact decks. So again, even if you break stuff down by the type of deck it is, 2 was still winning. And
it's kind of like a unfortunate outcome. I wish it was more interesting. I wish there was more nuance to it. The card is very powerful and very strong, obviously, but I think we can sort of more or less definitively say after, delving into it that you just pick 2.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about this a little bit because there were a lot of decks that 3 was the best choice on the average deck. Like Lathril 3 was the best choice. Dragon 3 was the best choice. Wilhelt 3 was the best choice. Ishin 3. Miram. Goshen Tai. Like they're Omnath. This is 4-color Omnath. And like Gishath, Animar, a lot of these that are the Atla Palani was best 3. Sisay, even the 5-color Sisay was best
of the
at
top
3.
50, it's not like 3 or 4 were. It's like it's
a number.
A number.
Giada, which is the Angel Tribal, was 3 was the best one still. So I was looking at that and I was like, what can we get from that? What kind of decks are those? And it's a lot of like creature type based decks. Like we got angels and dinosaurs and dragons and zombies. And those were all 3 was the best choice. And then...
But here's the thing about that is when you're wrong, I'm going to wrong in quotes, right?
Yeah.
When 3 was the right choice and you choose 2, your difference between the 2 is less than when you're wrong in the other direction, when 2 is the best choice and you chose 3.
Yes.
And so that's why I think, while it would be nice to look for spots where, in this case, I'm being clever and 3 is better to choose, it's not almost ever going to be optimal.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because, like, there are specific decks that you play against where 3 is the better choice, but you're playing against 3 decks.
Yeah.
And the odds that all 3 of the decks are 3 is better than 2 aren't very high.
Yeah, very. And that you'll be able to correctly identify that.
And so I would say, like, there are probably situations where 3 is the best choice. It's going to be minorly better, and two will suffice. But there's going to be way more where you just should have picked 2.
Yeah. And we should say this is for casual, right? Because I can see CEDH.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's something
being
whole other thing.
2 for sure every time, like with no exceptions. Actually, if anything, CEDH is probably going to have this conversation between 2 and 1 rather than 2 and 3.
I think 1's going to be much closer in the running.
It's far enough behind, though. I still think it's probably not even above 3, even in CEDH, but maybe.
Yeah, 3 seems like a weird. 3 seems like a weird number for CEDH. I don't know enough about it to speak definitively, I suppose. Yeah, and I was looking at these. I was like, maybe the ones that are 3 are just like tend to be built more casually. Like there's just less turbo builds of them.
Well, remember, we're clicking on average deck.
Average deck.
So that was always going to
true.
be a casual deck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, like Tovolar, it's still best to pick 2, and Tovolar is a werewolf deck. So I think there are probably...
Because all the huge werewolves dilute the 3.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, the more we dug and the more we tried to break it down and figure out why it was 3, the more it was just like, 2's probably just good. There are probably special cases.
There's some nuances we ran into, and let's like Zexara is an interesting one, right? Zexara is one of the top 50 commanders, a ton of X spells. Now, the X spells will trigger based on what the amount of mana you paid for the spell is, right? I know a lot of people understand that X is equal to 0 when you're counting mana value, but that's everywhere except when it's on the stack.
Right.
So when you cast it, if you paid X is equal to 3 and it costs red and X, that will trigger out of 4 according to Talion. So I think you have to assume that your opponent will just dodge whatever number you've got, 99% of the time. So you just don't count most of the spells in the Zexara deck for hits for anything.
Yeah. They're also certainly not going to be like 2 mana on the stack. It's an X-Spell deck.
Yeah, it's true.
They want it to be 10.
Right, exactly. Then there's other things like Kalia, Yuriko. These are not going to cast a lot of their cards, right? Ninjutsu is not casting something. Kalia is putting things onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. That's not casting a thing. So it's like, you have this stuff in here that would technically trigger at these numbers, but they won't cast it. It won't matter. You won't get anything. So I don't think that changes the calculus on what number you choose, though, because the remainder of the decks are still mostly either 2 or 3, and you still end up going with 2 because you're like, I may as well get the extra 4%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder, like, you and I both have Dragon's Approach decks.
Yeah.
That deck is like 40% 3.
Yeah.
I run 25 Dragon's Approaches, and there's other 3-drops in that deck.
We should have done the breakdown for your Dragon's Approach deck, but I can't imagine it's not 3, right?
It's gotta be
My
3.
Shadowborn Apostles deck, it's gotta be 1. There's 31 cards that are 1 mana, 1/1 in it.
But does that shift it enough?
Oh, that's really
like
interesting.
If you're playing in a pod with your Shadowborn Apostles deck, you have a ton of 1s. Do you... we know that you're going to cast the Shadowborn Apostles cards over and over and over again.
Versus the other 2 players, where 2's almost certainly correct.
Right. Does the 1 swing it?
I think Dragon's Approach is a lot more reasonable to choose 3 than Shadowborn Apostle is to choose 1 because 3 is going to be already close in the other 2 decks.
Right.
Because we know it's usually second place. So your additional, weighting towards 3 may average it out so 3 wins, but it's unlikely that my additional boost in the 1 category averages out to so 1 wins overall.
Right.
So I think against Dragon's Approach, yes, I would choose 3.
Yeah.
And against Shadowborn Apostles, I probably still choose 2.
Choose 2.
Yeah. It's part of it's a read too, because in those games, I think you would think, well, who's ahead right now? Who's likely to still be standing when there's only when 1 player's knocked out or 2 players? Because you definitely don't want to choose 3, but they're almost dead, and now I chose 3 because of the player that's not even in the game anymore.
Right.
So there's that too.
There's definitely going to be scenarios where maybe 1, 2, 3, and 4 aren't even the right call. You're like, they have to cast their commander to do anything, and they're at 2 life. I can lock you out of your commander.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like, there's probably scenarios where you can use it that way.
Or there's only one card I'm really scared of in their whole deck, and I know what it is.
And I know what it is, and I'm gonna draw a card if they cast it. Like,
that'll kill them. Or
if they're at a low life total. Yeah, so like a Karuga Companion could be enough to swing you to 3 because one deck likely will trigger 2 a lot less, or 1 a lot less. So I do think that there are scenarios where maybe you'd guess 3, but it's really a very specific deck.
It's going to be 90% of the time you guess 2, maybe 95% of the time. But
Yep.
But we're Magic players. We like to be clever. I want to look for those 5% of the time where it's right to choose 3. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the special mini-sode. This stuff is always fun to delve into. Let us know if you like this type of episode. It's something we could do a little bit more, which is short, on a sort of interesting topic that maybe doesn't warrant a full hour.
Yeah, it's fun to do just a little snippet of information. Make sure that you guys see it, especially when it is the one legendary that's spoiled right now, and everyone's like, "This card's busted. What do I do with it?"
Of course, we're talking about this card. It's the only one to talk about.
Before we go, we want to say thank you to our amazing team here at the Command Zone. Thank you to Damon Lenz, Eric Lem for gathering all of this information. Thank you for your help. Megan Yip, Gaurav Galati, Jordan Pridgeon, Jamie Block, Arthur Meadowcroft, Manson Lung, Josh Murphy, Jake Boss, Sam Waldo, Evan Limburger, Lady Danger, Craig Blanchett, Katie Cole, Mitch Trafford, Gabriel Pozos, and Jimmy Wong.
The ineffable. All right, everybody.
See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Peace.
Thank you for your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com or ask us on Twitter @JFWong and @JoshLeeQuai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.